My wife secretly partnered with her sister and embezzled $250, $0 from our family business, then lied about it until a hidden camera revealed her affair with our lawyer. Now she's trying to take everything in a bitter court battle. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where my wife, Lisa, would betray me so completely. Honestly, I thought we had a good marriage, mostly. Sure, she's always been a bit bitchy and demanding, but I figured that was just her personality. We've been together for 10 years, and I believed we had a solid life. That was until I started noticing small things that didn't add up. Phone calls at odd hours, her sudden obsession with her sister's social media, and her dismissive attitude whenever I asked about her day. But what really tipped me off was the night I caught her sneaking out of the house after I'd gone to bed. It started with her acting strangely. She'd be secretive about her phone, hiding it whenever I entered the room. She'd also get defensive when I asked where she was going. One night, I got curious and decided to check her messages. I figured she was just stressed or maybe having an affair, but I didn't expect what I found. Her messages with her sister Emily were full of secret plans, coded language, and references to the money. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed something more disturbing. She was talking about embezzling money from our family business, something I had no idea about. That was a blow. I've always trusted Lisa. We built our business together, and I believed she was as committed as I was. But apparently she'd teamed up with Emily, and they'd secretly siphoned off over $250, $0. They'd been laundering it through fake invoices, and I had no clue until I stumbled across the digital trail. That night I sat in the dark, stunned and furious. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. All those years we worked so hard for this business, and she was stealing from us. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The worst part, I still didn't fully understand her motives. Was it greed, desperation, or just pure malice? I decided I had to confront her. I couldn't let this slide, not just for the money but for my dignity. I stayed up late that night, going through her phone, her emails, everything I could find. When she finally came home, I was waiting in the living room. Her face was smug, as if she knew she was untouchable. I asked her straight out about the money, and her reaction was immediate. She denied everything, calling me paranoid, accusing me of stalking her, and saying I was just jealous of her sister's fabulous life. She spun lies so convincingly I almost doubted myself. But I had the evidence, and I knew she was lying. That moment marked the beginning of a long, painful journey, one I wasn't prepared for. Her reaction only fueled my anger. She screamed at me, called me insecure and controlling, and accused me of not trusting her. But I wasn't about to let her gaslight me. I told her I knew about the embezzlement, about her affair with our lawyer, Mark, and that I had the evidence. That's when she went quiet for the first time. Her eyes flickered, and I saw the panic behind her usual bitchy facade. The truth was out, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet. I wasn't sure. What was worse, the betrayal itself or the way she tried to deny, lie, and manipulate her way out of it? Honestly, I felt numb. All the trust I'd placed in her was gone. I kept replaying everything in my head, her lies, her sneaking around, her secret meetings with Mark, her betrayal of everything we built together. I was furious, hurt, and confused all at once. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had been playing me for a fool. I wondered how long she'd been planning this, how many nights she'd spent with Mark, and how much of our life savings they'd wasted. The betrayal cut deep, and I knew I had to decide what to do next. That night I sat alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what I'd just learned. I was angry at her, yes, but also at myself for not seeing the signs earlier. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and sick to my stomach, but I also knew I couldn't let her get away with it. The next day I started making plans. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything we'd worked for. I had the evidence, and I was determined to get justice, no matter how bitter it would be. I realized this was only the beginning of what would become a brutal fight, not just for the money, but for my dignity and future. After I confronted Lisa that night, the air between us was thick with tension. She tried to act like everything was just a misunderstanding, that I was blowing things out of proportion. She called me paranoid, said I was insecure, and accused me of spying on her because I didn't trust her. But I had the evidence, screenshots, bank statements, emails, that proved her involvement in the embezzlement and her affair with Mark. Still, hearing her deny everything, seeing her act like she was the victim, made my blood boil. I knew I couldn't just let her walk away from this. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about trust, respect, everything we'd built together. I told her I had enough evidence to take this to the authorities if she kept lying. She looked at me, her face a mixture of anger and panic, and said she'd explain everything. That's when she started throwing out excuses, saying she was under a lot of stress, that she only did it for us, that she'd never hurt me intentionally. It was all bullshit. I could see right through her lies, but I also knew she was trying to spin her way out of it. In the following days, I felt like I was walking through a fog. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and all I kept thinking about was how deep her betrayal went. She continued to deny the affair with Mark, but I knew better. I'd seen the texts, the late-night calls, the secret meetings. The worst part was, she acted like she was the one wronged, like I was the one causing trouble. That made me furious. How dare she accuse me of mistrust when she was out there screwing around with our lawyer? It felt like a punch in the gut every time I remembered her smug face, her lies, her manipulation. I decided I had to get legal advice. I wanted to know my options, how to handle the money, the business, and her attempts to take everything in this court battle she was already talking about starting. I hired a good lawyer, Mark, who I later found out she'd been sleeping with. My mind was racing. How did I let it get this far? I'd always been the stable one, the one who kept everything together, and now I was facing the collapse of everything I believed in. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious. Every time I thought about her, I saw her lying, her bitchy smirk, and her manipulative eyes. I also started digging into her financials more. Turns out she and Emily had been funneling money through fake invoices and shell companies, things I never even knew existed. They'd hidden the money in offshore accounts, and I was stunned that I hadn't caught it sooner. It was like peeling back layers of a corrupt onion. I found out she'd even been planning to leave me, take half the business, and live off the stolen money. The idea made me sick. I'd given her everything, my trust, my love, my hard work, and this is how she repaid me, by stealing and lying. It was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Meanwhile, Lisa kept up her act, throwing tantrums, accusing me of ruining her life, saying I was possessive and controlling. She insisted she was innocent of the affair, that Mark was just a friend, and that I was paranoid because I didn't understand her. She called me a lot of nasty names, accused me of being jealous of her sister Emily, and said I was breaking the family apart with my accusations. She played the victim perfectly, and honestly, for a moment I doubted myself. Was I overreacting? Was I just jealous? But then I looked at the evidence again and I knew the truth. It was a whirlwind. One minute I was trying to keep everything together, and the next I was planning how to protect what was mine. I knew I had to be strategic. I couldn't afford to let her manipulate her way out of this. I also started secretly recording her conversations, just in case I needed hard proof later. Every day was a battle, her lying, her crying, her trying to turn friends and family against me. She even tried to guilt-trip me into saving the marriage, but I was done. I couldn't trust her anymore, not after everything I'd uncovered. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the money or the affair. It was about her complete disregard for the vows we took, her betrayal of what we had. I felt betrayed, but I also knew I had to think ahead. I couldn't let her take everything, our house, the business, the savings, without a fight. I started gathering all the documents, receipts, and proof I could find. I was determined to fight for my rights, to make her pay for what she'd done, and to protect my future. I knew the legal battle ahead would be brutal, but I was ready. I'd been blindsided, yes, but I wasn't going down without a fight. The days that followed were like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every morning, I'd wake up with a pounding head, realizing that this mess was only getting worse. Lisa's lies kept piling up, and her attempts to manipulate me grew more desperate. She'd come home crying, claiming she was so sorry, begging me to believe her, insisting that the affair with Mark was just a mistake she was trying to fix. She said she loved me, that she'd never hurt me intentionally, but I couldn't believe a word out of her mouth anymore. Her actions spoke too loudly. Meanwhile, I was deep into forensic accounting, trying to track every dollar she and Emily had stolen. I discovered that the $250, $0 had been moved into multiple offshore accounts under fake names, transferred through a web of shell companies. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. I also uncovered evidence that she'd been secretly meeting with Mark at a hotel, sometimes late at night, sometimes during the workday when I thought she was busy with the business. I found receipts for dinners, gifts, even a few explicit texts that confirmed their affair. The betrayal cut me like a knife. I hired a private investigator to follow her just to get some peace of mind. What I saw confirmed everything I suspected. She was sneaking around, meeting Mark in secluded spots, sometimes when she said she was working late. I was furious but also devastated. How could she do this to me, to us? I'd always believed in honesty, loyalty, and the sanctity of marriage, and now I saw how hollow those words had become. Things escalated quickly. She started to threaten me, saying I'd ruin her life if I went through with the divorce. She claimed I was jealous and controlling, and that I'd never understand her need for excitement, for something different. She accused me of being a terrible husband, a terrible businessman, and said I was just jealous of her sister Emily's perfect life. I couldn't believe her audacity. She was trying to turn everyone against me, painting herself as the victim, while I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I thought was solid. I knew I had to act fast. I sat down with my lawyer, Mark. Yes, the same lawyer she'd been screwing around with, and laid out everything I'd uncovered. We discussed how to freeze her assets, how to file for divorce, and how to protect the business from her possible attempts to sabotage it. I also learned that she was planning to file a court injunction to try to take control of the business and any assets she could claim. She was playing dirty, but I was prepared for war. My lawyer told me that I had a very strong case, especially with all the evidence I'd gathered, but I knew she'd fight dirty too. One of the most bitter moments came when I found out she'd been lying about her financial situation. She told me she was broke, that she had no money and was barely getting by. Turns out she'd been secretly withdrawing large sums from the accounts, trying to hide her assets. She'd also been funneling money into her sister Emily's account, which I'd never suspected. The betrayal was staggering. I realized she'd been planning to leave me with nothing, to take everything I built, and to start fresh with Mark and Emily. I felt sick just thinking about it. The emotional toll was enormous. I went from feeling shock to anger to deep sadness. I kept asking myself how the woman I once loved could become this person, so manipulative, so selfish, so cruel. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and exhausted, but at the same time I was determined. I couldn't let her get away with this. I had to fight not just for the money or the business, but for my dignity. I couldn't imagine living in a world where I'd been so blind, so naive. The pain of betrayal was overwhelming, but I knew I had to keep going. In the middle of all this chaos, I also started reflecting on how I'd let this happen, how I'd missed the signs, how I'd trusted her blindly. I realized I'd been too comfortable, too trusting, and that's what made her betrayal so easy. I thought she was my partner, my equal, but I now saw her for what she truly was, a someone willing to lie, cheat, steal, and manipulate her way into what she wanted. I felt anger, yes, but also a strange sense of clarity. I knew I had to rebuild from the ashes, to protect what's left, and to move forward, even if it meant starting all over again. The next step was clear. I had to prepare for the legal battle. I needed to gather even more evidence, hidden cameras, recordings, anything that could prove her intent to cheat and steal. I also started documenting everything, conversations, transactions, her movements. I wanted to be ready for the fight ahead. I knew she'd try to spin it all, to manipulate the court and everyone around her, but I was determined to stay one step ahead. This was going to be a war, and I wasn't going down without a fight. The court date was set sooner than I'd hoped, and I knew I had to be fully prepared. Every day leading up to it felt like walking through a minefield. Lisa's lawyer, who of course was Mark, was already trying to spin her version of events, claiming she was the victim of my paranoia and controlling behavior. She insisted she loved me, that her affair with Mark was just a moment of weakness, and that she never intended to steal from the business. Her tears and fake remorse were almost convincing, but I knew better. I had the evidence and I was ready to fight. I turned everything over to my lawyer. We built a case showing how she and Emily had embezzled over $250, $0 through fake invoices and offshore accounts. We had bank statements, emails, and even recordings of her discussing her plans with Emily, proof that she'd been orchestrating this for months, maybe longer. I also had the recordings of her and Mark in the hotel, caught in moments that left no doubt about their affair. Each piece of evidence was a blow to her credibility, but I knew she'd try to spin it all in court. The day of the hearing arrived. I remember walking into that courtroom feeling like I was about to face the worst battle of my life. Lisa sat across from me, her face tight with anger and desperation. She tried her usual tactics, crying, pleading, throwing accusations, but I kept my composure. I knew the truth. The judge listened to both sides, looked over the evidence, and I could see her eyes narrowing as she processed everything. I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that I'd finally laid it all out, but anxiety about what the outcome would be. The court ruled in my favor, at least to some extent. Lisa was ordered to freeze her assets, and the court appointed a forensic accountant to review all her financials. She was furious. She screamed and shouted, calling me a vindictive bastard, and claiming I was trying to ruin her life. Her face was twisted with rage, and I felt a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. She had tried to manipulate everything to turn the court against me, but the evidence was too strong. Still, I knew this was just the beginning of a long fight. The aftermath was chaos. Lisa immediately started filing for divorce, and she hired her own team of lawyers to fight for custody of the house, the business, and her supposed right to the money she'd stolen. She claimed I was an abusive, controlling husband who never appreciated her, which was utterly false. I'd always been the one working late, trying to keep our business afloat, supporting her ambitions. Now she was painting me as the villain, and I had to prepare for a bitter court battle to protect what was mine. Meanwhile, I kept digging into her financials. I discovered she'd been planning to leave me for a while, secretly funneling money into her sister Emily's accounts, trying to hide her assets. She'd also made plans to transfer ownership of the business, so she could walk away with half of everything. I was stunned at how calculated her betrayal had been. I'd trusted her for so long, and she'd been plotting behind my back all along. It was a devastating realization, how deeply she'd lied to me, how much she'd manipulated everyone around her. Throughout all this, I experienced a roller coaster of emotions. I was angry, humiliated, and deeply hurt. The woman I'd loved and trusted had betrayed me in the worst way possible, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I knew I had to stay strong, to protect what was left of my life, and to fight for my rights. I was determined not to let her win, not to let her take everything I'd worked so hard for. I started reaching out to my friends and family, telling them the truth, and preparing myself for the battle ahead. One thing I learned from all this is how fragile trust can be, how easily it can be shattered by lies, greed, and betrayal. I also learned that sometimes you have to fight dirty to protect yourself. Lisa's tactics were ruthless. She tried to smear my name, manipulate the court, and turn people against me. But I refused to be a victim. I gathered every piece of evidence I could, stayed calm, and made sure I was ready for whatever came next. Because at the end of the day, I knew that justice wouldn't come from just hoping things would work out. Sometimes, you have to fight for it. The court battles dragged on for months, and each day felt like a new assault on my sanity. Lisa's lawyers kept pushing for her to gain control of the business and the house, claiming she was the innocent wife who'd been wronged by my supposed controlling nature. Meanwhile, I was fighting to keep what was rightfully mine, armed with the mountain of evidence I'd collected. I had recordings, bank statements, emails, and witness testimonies, all pointing to her betrayal, her embezzlement, and her affair with Mark. But Lisa's side was relentless, spinning lies, twisting facts, and trying to paint me as the villain. One of the most gut-wrenching moments was when Lisa's lawyer accused me of abusing her emotionally and physically. Completely false, of course. I was stunned. I knew she was desperate, trying to undermine my credibility, but I also knew I couldn't let her manipulate the court into thinking I was the bad guy. I had to stay composed, stick to the facts, and let the evidence speak for itself. I hired a private investigator to gather recordings of her threatening me, her making plans to leave with the money, and her talking openly about her affair with Mark. These recordings became my strongest weapons. The emotional toll was immense. I went from feeling anger and betrayal to deep sadness. Every time I saw her in court, acting innocent and crying crocodile tears, I felt like I was losing my mind. I had trusted her for so long, believed in our vows, in our future, and now I was watching her try to destroy everything we built. I wondered how I had been so blind, how I missed the signs. The worst part was seeing her manipulate everyone around her, including our friends and family, to turn against me. She played the victim so convincingly that even some of my closest friends started to doubt me. Despite all her efforts, the court finally ruled in my favor on a few key points. They ordered Lisa to pay back a significant portion of the stolen money, and they mandated an audit of her financials. But the fight was far from over. She filed for full custody of the house and the business, claiming she was the primary caregiver and that I was unfit. I knew her tactics. She wanted to strip me of everything and leave me with nothing. I had to prepare for a custody battle as well, which meant more stress, more legal fees, and more sleepless nights. In the midst of all this chaos, I also started to realize how much I'd been emotionally drained. I'd trusted her blindly, and now I was paying the price. I questioned my judgment, my ability to read people, and even my self-worth. But I also knew I couldn't let her win. I had to stay strong for myself, for the business, and for what little dignity I had left. I began therapy to cope with the emotional fallout, and I leaned heavily on my close friends for support. They reminded me that I was not the villain here, that I'd done nothing wrong except love someone who betrayed me. One thing I learned from this entire ordeal is that betrayal cuts deeper than most people realize. It's not just about the money or the affair. It's about the trust that's shattered, the illusions destroyed. I also learned that sometimes the only way to fight back is with cold, hard facts and unwavering resolve. Lisa was trying to manipulate her way out of accountability, but I refused to let her. I knew I had to be relentless, to stay one step ahead, and to protect what was mine. Because if I didn't, she would walk all over me, and I'd be left with nothing but regret. Now, as I prepare for the final court hearing, I feel a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. I know she'll keep fighting, throwing everything she has, lies, manipulation, guilt trips, but I also know I have the truth on my side. I've learned that betrayal can come from the people you trust the most, and the only way to survive it is to face it head-on, armed with evidence, integrity, and a resolve to rebuild. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing: I'm not going down without a fight. The final court hearing was the most draining experience I've ever endured. Every detail, every piece of evidence was scrutinized, and I knew Lisa's lawyers would do everything possible to spin her into the victim again. But I was ready. I had spent months preparing, gathering every shred of proof: her secret offshore accounts, the recordings of her planning with Emily and Mark, the emails where she admitted to the embezzlement. I saw the look in her eyes, desperate, furious, and utterly defeated, when the judge finally made the ruling. The judge ordered Lisa to pay back the full amount of the stolen money, around $250, $0, and to surrender her claim to the business. She was also ordered to stay away from the family home and the company, and the court appointed a trustee to oversee the assets until the final settlement. In her final act of defiance, she tried to claim emotional distress and argued she needed time to recover, but her lies fell flat. The court saw through her manipulations. I felt a strange sense of relief, like the weight I'd been carrying for so long was finally lifting. After the ruling, Lisa's face twisted with fury. She yelled, called me every name in the book, and accused me of destroying her life. But I didn't care. I had what I needed to move on. I knew she'd try to appeal, try to drag things out, but I was done fighting her. I had already begun rebuilding my life, focusing on the business and my own well-being. I had learned a lot through this ordeal about trust, betrayal, and the importance of protecting myself. In the aftermath, I filed for divorce. It was a painful process, but it was necessary. I wanted to cut all ties with her and start fresh. The custody battle was tough, but I managed to secure visitation rights and a fair arrangement for the house and the business. I didn't get everything I wanted, but I got enough to rebuild my future. I also made sure to cut her out of my life completely. No more secret calls, no more lies, no more playing the victim. I realized I deserved better, and I owed it to myself to heal. Looking back, I feel a strange mixture of anger and relief. Anger at how easily she betrayed everything we had, and relief that I finally exposed her true nature. I learned that sometimes people are capable of the most shocking betrayals, things you'd never expect from someone you love. But I also learned that no matter how deep the betrayal, you can come out stronger if you face it head-on. I've become more cautious, more aware of the signs of deception, and more determined to protect myself. I want to tell anyone reading this, trust is fragile. Be vigilant. Listen to your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it, no matter how much you love someone. Because if you don't, you might find yourself in a situation worse than you could ever imagine. I've lost a lot, but I've gained clarity. I've learned that justice isn't always quick or easy, but it's worth fighting for. And most importantly, I've learned that even after the deepest betrayal, you can rebuild your life, piece by piece, stronger than before.